Picture an operating theatre in London in the 1840s. A crowded gallery of medical students leans in from steep-tiered seats, looking down at a wooden table stained dark with old blood. On that table lies a patient, fully conscious, terrified, about to have a leg amputated. There is no anesthesia. There is no pain relief of any kind. The patient will feel everything. Standing over him is a tall, powerfully built Scottish surgeon. He turns to the gallery of students, pulls out his knife, and calls out the words he was famous for. "Time me, gentlemen, time me." And then he begins to cut. This man was the fastest surgeon of his era, and in one legendary operation, his blinding speed would produce something that exists nowhere else in the annals of surgery. A single operation with a 300% mortality rate. This is Dark Diagnosis Files, and this is the story of Robert Liston. To understand Robert Liston, to understand why a surgeon would treat an amputation like a race against a stopwatch, you have to first understand the sheer horror of surgery before modern medicine. And this is documented history, drawn from medical records and the accounts of those who lived through that era. Before the 1840s, surgery was performed on people who were completely awake. There was no general anesthesia. A patient facing an amputation might be given some alcohol or a strap of leather to bite down on, and then be pinned to the table by several strong assistants, whose entire job was to hold the thrashing, screaming patient still enough for the surgeon to work. The operating theatres themselves were places of almost unimaginable grimness by modern standards. Surgeons operated in ordinary street clothes, often in old frock coats, stiffened with the dried blood and fluids of previous operations, and disturbingly they wore that filth with pride. A coat caked hard with the residue of past surgeries marked a busy, experienced surgeon. Cleanliness was seen as almost effeminate, an unnecessary affectation. Instruments went unwashed between patients. The same blade, the same saw, the same hands moved from one open wound to the next, carrying with them invisible death that no one yet understood. And the sounds. Contemporary accounts describe operating days as ordeals for everyone present, the screams of conscious patients echoing through the hospital, so distressing that other patients awaiting their own operations could hear exactly what was coming for them. Some patients facing surgery were said to have fled the hospital entirely rather than face the table. For those who stayed, the experience was a waking nightmare that many did not survive, and that those who did never forgot. In that world, speed was not showmanship. Speed was mercy, speed was survival. Every single second that the knife was in the wound was a second of unimaginable agony for a conscious human being. Every second also meant more blood loss, and a greater chance the patient would die of shock right there on the table, their body simply overwhelmed by pain and trauma. A surgeon who could remove a limb in 30 seconds instead of 3 minutes was not just sparing his patient 6 times the suffering. He was genuinely, measurably improving their odds of surviving at all. So the great surgeons of this era trained themselves to be fast, brutally, astonishingly fast, and none was faster than Robert Liston. Robert Liston was born in Scotland in 1794 and trained in Edinburgh, one of the great centres of medicine in the world at the time. He was, by every account, an imposing figure. Tall, strong, physically powerful in a way that mattered enormously for a job that was, in that era, as much about brute force as delicate skill. Sawing through a human femur quickly requires real strength. He eventually became a professor of surgery at University College Hospital in London, and there he earned his legendary nickname the fastest knife in the West End. The accounts of his speed are staggering. Medical historian Richard Gordon documented that Liston could amputate a leg in around 2.5 minutes. On at least one occasion, he was reported to have removed a limb in a mere 28 seconds. He was known to clamp his bloody knife between his teeth to keep both hands free during a procedure, working with a fluid, ferocious efficiency that left the watching students stunned. And crucially, this is important to understanding him, Liston was genuinely good. His speed produced real results. In an era when surgeons routinely lost 1 in 4 patients, Liston lost only around 1 in 10. His patients survived at far higher rates than those of his slower colleagues. He was not a reckless butcher. He was, for his time, one of the best in the world at a nearly impossible job. He was also, by many accounts, a genuinely compassionate man beneath the ferocity, and a bit of a rebel. He was known for his willingness to take on the desperate cases that other surgeons refused, the patients deemed too far gone or too poor to bother with. He clashed repeatedly with the medical establishment of Edinburgh, unafraid to publicly call out colleagues he thought were incompetent or cruel, which made him powerful enemies and eventually contributed to his move to London. He designed his own surgical instruments, some of which, like a type of splint and a locking forceps, bore his name and remained in use long after his death. This was not a careless man. This was a driven, skilled, opinionated pioneer, operating at the absolute limit of what his brutal era allowed. But that same speed, that same ferocious intensity, occasionally led to catastrophe. And this brings us to the single operation that cemented Liston's place in medical legend, the one with the 300% mortality rate. Now, a note of honesty, because this channel is built on it. This particular story comes largely from the accounts of medical historian Richard Gordon, and some of its most dramatic details carry the color of legend, retold and polished over the years. But the underlying realities it illustrates, the chaos, the blood, the danger, not just to the patient but to everyone in the room, are entirely documented true of pre-anesthetic surgery. Liston was performing a leg amputation, moving at his usual blistering speed before a packed gallery of spectators. The patient was on the table. An assistant was holding the limb steady, his hands right in the path of the work, and spectators crowded close, as was normal, to get a good view of the master at work. Liston brought his knife down and through the patient's leg with such incredible speed that, in the same motion, he cut through the fingers of his young assistant, the man holding the limb. The blade came off the patient, and, as Liston swung the knife back up, it slashed through the coat of a spectator standing too close to the table. And now the three deaths. The patient, his leg successfully removed, later died. Not from the amputation itself, but from the thing that killed so many surgical patients in that era before anyone understood germs. Infection. Gangrene set into the wound, and he died days later. The assistant, whose fingers had been sliced off by Liston's blade, also developed an infection in those wounds. He too died of gangrene. And the spectator, the man whose coat was slashed. He had not actually been cut, but he was so convinced that the flashing blade had stabbed him, so overwhelmed with sudden terror, that he reportedly collapsed on the spot and died, apparently of pure shock and fright. One operation, 3 dead. The patient, the assistant, and a bystander who was never even touched. The only surgery in recorded history said to have achieved a mortality rate of 300%. A dim surgical theatre, empty now, tiered wooden benches rising into shadow around a single scarred operating table. It is a story that sounds almost too grimly perfect to be entirely true, and as we said, some of its details may have grown in the telling, but every element of it reflects a real danger of that world. Surgeons genuinely did cut assistants, spectators genuinely did faint and on occasion come to harm, and infection, gangrene, genuinely was a merciless killer that claimed patients who had survived the knife itself, because the concept of sterilizing instruments and hands did not yet exist. Liston's speed produced other legendary near disasters too, recounted in medical histories. In one account, moving too fast during an amputation, he accidentally amputated a patient's testicle along with the leg. In another, more serious documented type of error, his eagerness and confidence led him to misjudge a case, mistaking a pulsing arterial aneurysm in a boy's neck for a simple abscess and cutting into it, with fatal results. These stories capture the double edge of the man, the very qualities that made Liston brilliant, his speed, his confidence, his decisiveness, were the same qualities that, when they went wrong catastrophically. In a world without anesthesia, there was little room for slow, careful deliberation. The system demanded speed, and speed occasionally demanded a terrible price. But here is the part of Robert Liston's story that transforms him from a grim curiosity into a genuinely pivotal figure in medical history, because Liston was present at, and central to, the single moment that would make everything you've just heard obsolete. On the 21st of December, 1846, at University College Hospital in London, Robert Liston performed a leg amputation on a patient named Frederick Churchill. But this time, something was different. This time, the patient was rendered unconscious first, using ether, the newly discovered anesthetic gas, just brought across the Atlantic from its first demonstrations in America. Liston operated. He removed the leg in his usual 25 to 30 seconds, and then the patient woke up and asked when the operation was going to begin. He had felt nothing at all. Liston looked at his stunned audience and reportedly declared, "This Yankee Dodge, gentleman, beats mesmerism hollow." He understood, in that instant, that he was witnessing the end of the world he had mastered. It was the first operation performed in Europe using modern anesthesia, and it changed surgery forever. The significance of that December day is hard to overstate. Ether had been publicly demonstrated in Boston, in the United States, only weeks earlier, in October of 1846. Word of it crossed the Atlantic by ship, and Liston, always alert to genuine advances despite his establishment enemies, moved quickly to try it. That a surgeon so completely defined by speed would be the one to embrace the very technology that made his signature speed obsolete says something about him. He was not so attached to his own legend that he would reject a better way. He saw what ether meant, and rather than resent it, he championed it. Think about the profound irony of it. Robert Liston had spent his entire career becoming the fastest surgeon alive, because speed was the only mercy available in a world of conscious, screaming patients. And then he himself performed the operation that made speed almost irrelevant. Once a patient could be put to sleep, painlessly, a surgeon no longer had to race the clock. He could slow down, he could be careful, precise, meticulous. The age of the flashing blade and the stopwatch was over, and the age of modern deliberate surgery had begun, and Liston lit the fuse on that revolution himself. Robert Liston did not live long enough to see where that revolution led. He died just under a year later, in 1847, from an aneurysm, reportedly following a sailing accident. He was 53 years old. He died right at the hinge point of history, having bridged two completely different eras of medicine: the brutal, blood-soaked world of surgery as agony that he had mastered, and the dawn of the painless, careful surgery that would eventually save countless millions of lives. Within a couple of decades of his death, the other great pillar of modern surgery would fall into place: Joseph Lister's antiseptic methods, which finally conquered the infections and gangrene that had killed so many of Liston's patients, even after successful operations. Anesthesia removed the pain, antisepsis removed the infection. Together, they turned surgery from a desperate last resort horror into the precise, life-saving discipline we know today. So when we look back at Robert Liston, we should see him clearly, not as a monster, and not as a mere punchline about a 300% mortality rate, but as something more complicated and more human. He was a genuinely gifted surgeon doing a nightmarish job under impossible conditions, saving more patients than most of his peers in a world where the operating table was a place of pure terror. And he was there, blade in hand, at the exact moment that world began to end. Every time you or someone you love goes under anesthesia for a routine, painless operation and wakes up wondering when it will start, you are living in the world that opened up on Liston's operating table in December 1846. If the real history of medicine grips you the way it grips us, please take a moment to subscribe to Dark Diagnosis Files. We investigate the true, documented story of medicine, its horrors, its disasters, and the hard-won breakthroughs that dragged it out of the dark. Your subscription is what keeps this channel going. This has been a real, documented historical account. Every detail is sourced from confirmed historical and medical records. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday and Friday, real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. For most of human history, surgery meant being awake for every second of it. We are extraordinarily lucky to live on the other side of the line Robert Liston helped us cross.